Welcome back to Explorium Academy, Session 7. Today we are going to be building the meeting prep agent. This agent is a research-heavy agent that prepares sales reps for meetings. The agent is going to combine multiple data sources and produce structured research outputs that are actionable by these sales reps. Okay, so we are back here in N8N, and like I mentioned earlier, today we're going to be building the research agent. And this agent is going to be able to go through your calendar and export the different meetings that you have for the day. It's going to be able to filter out for external meetings specifically, so we can do research on both the company and the attendees involved, so that you have all the information needed to go into this meeting and be ready to perform. All right, so now let's get started. And like every other workflow, let's add a trigger node. So in production, this is probably best to use a scheduled node where you can schedule it to run every morning and pull all the meetings that you have for that day. But for the sake of example, we're going to trigger it manually so we can test it as we build. Okay, so right now we have our node inputted, and the next thing we need to input is our calendar node. So I use Google Calendar, so I'm going to input a Google Calendar node, which is right here. And we're going to do the get many events because I want to pull many events from my calendar. Okay, so I already have my credentials inputted. We're going to want to pull events and we want to get many of them. Let's pull specifically from my calendar and let's return all the events within in the next, just to limit it, 0.1 days, just to keep it simple. But again, this could be whatever you want. You can set it to the whole week, you can set it to a whole day ahead, and set it on a schedule so it runs at a particular time. Okay, so just to test this right now, perfect. You can see it returned 2 events, and that is correct. I have one internal event and one external event. And now the next step is to actually filter for that external event, because we don't really care about preparing for internal events. We already know everyone that we're going into that meeting with. But for external events, it is important to get all this information. All right, so the next thing we want to do is we want to filter for these external events. And in order to do that, we need to use a code node. So we're going to code in JavaScript. And I already have the code pre-written, so you can go ahead and pause the video and look at the code yourself. But essentially all it does is I am filtering for all attendees that don't have, all meetings that have attendees that do not have the Explorium.ai domain in them. Again, for your own use case, you're going to want to replace this domain with your own, but for the sake of example, we are going to run with Explorium. All right, so once I execute this code, you can see that now I only have one item, and that is a meeting called NVIDIA Sync with Jensen Huang, the CEO. All right, perfect. Moving along. All right, so now we have 2 different courses of action. Now that we have our meetings filtered and everything needed to now enrich, there are 2 different things we want to enrich. We want to enrich companies and we want to enrich attendees. And these are 2 different actions that are going to require 2 different research agents. So let's start with the companies. So the first thing we want to do is we want to now loop over all the external meetings that we have. For the sake of example, we only have one, but you may have many. And so in order to do this, we are actually going to have to use a loop over items node in order to go through each of the meetings individually. And the reason we are using a loop over items node in this scenario, as opposed to using nodes that allow for auto pagination, is because we will be requiring an AI agent in this side of the workflow, and an AI agent does not support auto pagination. It has to go through each company, each attendee individually, so it is able to use the relevant context. All right, so the next thing we want to add is a loop over items node. So let's search for that here, and we will add that, and perfect. All right. So now we have our loop over items node. Let's zoom out a little bit, and let's drag that up here. Okay, and just to build the structure of what we're going to do here, we are going to build the loop that will now research on the different companies right here. And then separately, we're going to make a branch from this node right here, and we're going to loop over all of the attendees at those companies here. All right, so now starting with the company side, the company loop, let's proceed. All right, so now we have our loop, and if we execute this, we can see that in the loop branch, we have our current meeting. Now, what we do need to do is we need to extract the company from the information we have from our calendar event. And the company is actually going to be in the domain of the emails. So we can extract that domain using another code node. So we are going to want to replace this here with another code node. So let's first delete this and click this plus button. Let's add another code node, and we're going to code in JavaScript. All right, so again, I already have the code pre-written. You can again pause the video here and look at the code yourself, but essentially we're just going to be looking for the domains of the external attendees in each meeting. Okay, so now if we execute this step, you can see that our company domain is now nvidia.com. Perfect. We have the domain for the company, and now we are ready to proceed. So the next thing we want to do is, now that we have this domain, we want to now start using the Explorium APIs to enrich different information on this company. So like we have done in previous projects, when using the Explorium API, it's a two-step process. The first thing you need to do is you need to match the business to get the relevant Explorium business ID. And then the next thing you need to do is you can enrich that business ID with any relevant information that you are looking for. All right, so now let's grab the Explorium API nodes. Now let's get the Explorium API node. Let's do the match operation. Let's make sure it's configured correctly. First, we have our credentials already inputted. Make sure it's the match operation and on business. And we need to input our relevant information here. Let's execute the previous nodes so we have information to drag in. All right, so we have company domain. And again, using company domain is perfectly fine. That's all you really need. If you have company name, it helps as well. So if we execute this step, you can see that we now have the correct business ID for NVIDIA. Okay, so the next step now is ensuring that we have a valid business ID moving forward. There are, in some scenarios, that we did not pull back a valid business ID for the domain that we were using. So maybe in these scenarios, the business ID would be empty. And now and we want to be able to handle those cases. So let's add an if node. And this if node is essentially going to be looking for if the business ID is empty or not. So let's drag in the business ID, and we just want to make sure that it is not empty. Perfect. Let's convert types when required. Always a good thing to do. And let's execute the node. Perfect. It's true because we have a valid business ID. If for whatever reason the match endpoint didn't pull back a valid business ID for the domain that you were looking up, it would be false, and we would just skip this loop. All right, so now we are moving along well on this company side loop. We have our valid business ID. We have filtered out any domains that did not pull back a valid business ID. And now the next thing we want to do is we want to enrich these businesses with relevant information. All right, so now the next thing we want to do is let's add a rich node from the Explorium APIs. All right, so if we click here to enrich, ensure everything is configured correctly again, we have our Explorium account, enrich, type business, and let's choose different enrichments that we want to enrich on. Firmographics, let's do technographics, let's do, what else is interesting for this scenario? Maybe some business challenges. All right. So that is done. We have our enrich node right here. And now another thing that could be interesting to add here is maybe looking at events that have been happening for this company. So if we go ahead and we click add here as well, now this is where it gets a little tricky. Let's actually add it right here. And let's add an events node. So we click here to events under the actions, and we can make sure that the operation is set to events. Now, what this is going to do, and I know we haven't used this endpoint yet in Explorium, is it's actually going to pull back any recent events that um, that the company has done in different event types that we are looking for. So let's look at the different event types that might be relevant to us. I don't think IPO announcement is necessarily relevant for NVIDIA. They have IPO'd the past, but like maybe they have done a new product launch, a new office opening, maybe some sort of new partnership. Any of those events could be very intriguing to us. Now let's make sure this is configured correctly. So actually we want to do both of these enrichments at the same time. So I'm going to drag that here. So now we are going to do both of these enrichments at the same time. This is the regular enrichment that we are doing firmographics, technographics, business challenges. And then right here is the Explorium events endpoint where we are pulling back recent events on the 3 different event types that we were interested in. Okay, so now we are doing both of these enrichments at the same time. The next thing we want to do is we want to merge the results together. So we are going to add a merge node right here, and we're going to append the results from 2 different inputs. Boom. And then actually, we are going to break this here, and we're going to drag the results from this all the way back to the beginning of the loop over node to complete our loop. All right, just to make it look a little bit cleaner, that is our current workflow so far on the company enrichment loop. All right, so we are moving along very well. Let's execute the previous nodes, make sure everything is working correctly. It's my bad, we forgot to configure our nodes. We need to drag in the business IDs into the different nodes to make sure that they are enriching the correct business. And I forgot to do that for both of them. This is my bad. All right. Now everything should work well. Perfect. All right. Now we have all of our information here. You can see from the different APIs, and we are merged, and they're all merged together here in some very, very long output. All right. The next step now is to clean up these merged outputs a little bit. And we're going to do that with a code node. It is the easiest way to just clean up some of your data. We're going to code again in JavaScript. And again, I have some code pre-written, and I will make it visible so if you can pause the video and look at the code yourself. I will scroll through it quickly. But essentially, we are just organizing the different data into some very organized structures. And we're doing this for one reason, because the next step, we are going to be feeding this into an AI agent, and it is a lot easier when you can feed the AI agent some very organized data. All right, so again, let's execute this step and make sure everything is working as we planned. Awesome, it executed successfully. Now we have all of our information. So like I mentioned a second ago, the next step is going to be using an AI agent. So let's add the AI agent here. Click AI agent. Perfect. So like we have done in previous workflows, we do need to configure this AI agent in a unique way. So there are a few different things we need to do. The first thing is we need to add the relevant chat model. Again, you have many different options to choose from. I'm going to use Anthropic. That's where I have my valid credentials. So we're going to leave that right there. All right. Now, we do also want to have a structured output. So we are going to do that right here. and add in the structured output parser. I, again, already have the schema for this output pre-written. I will make it very visible for you guys to be able to copy if you are interested. So here is the output that I'm looking for. All right. Now that that's done, the last thing I want to add is an Explorium MCP. And the reason for this is if the AI agent is doing any research or consolidating some of your research and figures that it might need some more information, the Explorium MCP allows the AI agent to access the Explorium endpoints and pull different information on the company that it deems necessary. So let's go down here to Tools. We're going to go to the MCP client tool, and we're going to configure the Explorium MCP. And in order to do that, we need to put in the correct endpoint, which is right here. We need to make this HTTP streamable. Authentication, we're going to do header auth. We already have valid credentials here. And all right, we are set to go. So now we have our AI agent configured almost correctly. Now the only thing we need to do is we need to put in the relevant prompts and system messages. All right, so the first things first, let's put in a system message. So let's add in that option here. And again, I have a system message that is pre-written that I think fits well for this scenario. But the issue is, again, this is tailored towards my use case, which is as an employee of Explorium. So you should tailor it for yourself and really just change some of the key details to fit your needs. All right. Now let's add in a prompt. Let's change that to define below, and we're going to add the prompt here. Perfect. So now we have our inputs that are all organized and then a small little instructions bit below. Great. This should be ready to go. So if we execute the step, perfect. The node executed successfully, and we have our relevant output. Just look at me and we can see it right here. Great. We're almost done now with the company enrichment node, and the next thing we need to do is just clean up the output a little bit more just to make sure that is super usable for our output, which again could be super variable, but I think for today's video, we are going to output this all to Slack so you can have a very easy to read Slack output in the morning. So again, the next thing we want to do is we want to add some sort of code node to just clean up some of the data. And you can see that I'm going to put this code here just to organize a little bit and clean up some of the output so that the message is super clean and readable. Great. Now that that is done, you can drag that down, drag that here, and we have the first loop completely done. And now the next thing we want to do is we want to now enrich the attendees. We have finished enriching all the companies. All right, so let's continue. The next thing we want to do is we want to add a new node. Let's create the new loop below here, and let's create a list of all the external attendees in our meetings. So again, let's use the code node to do that, and let's paste our code from that I've already rewritten right here. You can see it's very simple code, and we are simply just searching for external attendees. All right, let's now drag here. Let's create a little branch, and boom, we're searching for external attendees, and we are good to go. Now we're going to do a similar process that we did using for the company enrichment loop. We're going to create another loop, but now looking through all of the attendees and enriching them and doing research on them. So Similar to above, the first thing we want to add is a loop over items node. Perfect. Let's make sure it is correctly added. All right. Perfect. Now let's keep moving. After we do this, the next thing we want to do is we want to again get the business IDs for these attendees. And matching on business is a 0 credit process, so there really is no downside to calling it whenever you call necessary, whenever you feel it's necessary. So again, the next thing we want to do is we want to extract the company domains in order to use it in this loop. So let's add a node here. That is another code node. And this is essentially identical to what we did before. We're just going to extract the external domains from the attendees' emails. Now, if we execute this step, let's just make sure everything is running correctly. Perfect. We have the email right here for Jensen Huang. And again, we do need to keep passing forward the email because that is how we're going to enrich the specific attendee. And the domain is how we're going to get the relevant business ID. All right. So now the next step, now that we have all the information needed to complete our enrichments, is to match the domain to get the relevant business ID again. So let's add that Explorium API match node here. And again, we're going to do businesses, and let's drag in the domain right here and execute that step. Perfect. And now the next thing we want to do is, because this is on attendees, we also need to match the prospect to get the relevant prospect ID. So that is the same action here, but the only difference is on type, we're going to change from businesses to prospects so we can match people. And given our information, and you can go back here to our last JavaScript node, we have the email address, and that is enough to find the relevant prospect ID. So we're going to drag the email address right here, and we can execute this step. And we can see we got the correct prospect ID for Jensen Huang right here. All right. Now, similar to how this was done in the previous step, we do want to filter out anytime we were not able to match the prospect successfully. So let's add another if node right here, and simply just drag in your prospect ID value here and look for if it is not empty. Execute that step to make sure it runs successfully. Cool, it's in the true branch, and we are now good to go. Let's delete this replace me node, it's unneeded. All right. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to enrich these prospect IDs with any information that we think is interesting and we think is relevant for our meetings. So let's add in another Explorium API node here, but instead of match, we are going to do enrich. Again, we have to change the type to prospects because now we're enriching the attendees. And let's choose the information that we think is relevant for this. I think having some additional contact information could be relevant if we want to know some of their phone numbers, maybe other contact details and stuff like that. We can bring in their entire professional profile, and we can bring in their LinkedIn posts, any recent LinkedIn activity as well. Create an overarching profile for this attendee. All right, so now that we have these enrichments chosen, let's execute the step and make sure that everything is running as planned. All right, perfect. Our enrichments were successful. You can see all of the enrichments that we brought back here on the specific attendee. Now, the next thing we want to do is we want to clean these outputs so they're best fed into our AI agent, which will be in the next step. So let's add this code node here and paste in some code that can clean up the outputs. And here's the code that we'll be using. All right. Now that's done, we can execute this step, make sure the code is functioning properly. All right, moving along very well. The next step, again, similar to the loop that we did previously, is going to be adding an AI agent to process all of this information and create some sort of deep research on each attendee that you can use. So let's click on the AI agent and let's configure it similarly to how we did above. We can add the Anthropic chat model. Let's add a structured output. And again, I have my output schema already created, and you can refer to it if you would like. All right, moving along. Let's add in the Explorium MCP to do any research that we think would be helpful as well. So similar process, we're just going to add a tool, and we're going to add in an MCP client tool and put in the relevant information for Explorium. So that means just adding in the relevant endpoint. We want to do header auth, and we already have our credentials inputted. All right, now that we have all of the tools and models put into our AI agent, the next thing we want to do is now configure the prompt and system message again for this specific AI agent that will be going through all of the attendees' information. So first things first, let's put in a system message to give it some very specific instructions. I will paste in my pre-written system message here and allow you to look through it if you think it is relevant for your use case. All right, and now let's put in a prompt message right here. Awesome. This one's very simple. Again, we're just going to put in the information you can see here and then generate an attendee research brief. Perfect. Now let's execute this step and make sure that the outputs are what we expected. Perfect. The AI agent node executed successfully and outputted what we expected. So now we're almost done with our attendee research loop. Next, we're just going to add one more code node like we did in the previous loop, just to clean up everything and make the output super easily read and digestible when we output it to Slack. This is the code that I'd pre-written. Again, take a look for yourself and make sure that it is relevant to you. All right, let's execute this node just to make sure everything is running smoothly, iteratively, so we can debug as best as possible. Perfect. We can see the output right here, very structured and organized with some of the key structural outputs that we asked for. All right, so now that we have both loops completed, the next step is merging the outputs of both together. So we're going to do this using the outputs of both of the loop over items nodes and merging them using a merge node. So the first thing we want to do is we want to add a merge node here. So let's search that, add the merge node. Let's now drag that towards the middle and drag the output of the other loop over item node as the other input. The output of the loop over item nodes is actually the done side here. So you can drag that right here. You can see the done from this loop over item node and the done from this loop over item node now are being merged together. All right, now in this merge node, we are going to do something slightly different than we did before. We're going to now combine the two, and we're going to combine them by matching fields. The field that we want to match on is going to be called domain. Both of the inputs should have this field, And now when we run this node, it should combine the two together. Okay, perfect. We can see that they merged successfully. We can see here that we have the doc content here from the company loop, and then we have the attendee doc content here below from the attendee loop. We can see that they merged successfully on the similar domain of nvidia.com. All right, now that we have our information combined and ready to go, we can now move on. And just a little note, now this is just an example, so I do only have one event that is being enriched, but if you were to have multiple events on your calendar, in this moment, each event would be a different item. So now what we can do is we can loop over each of these items to send them to Slack individually, so it comes in an organized manner to your Slack. So what we're going to do is we're going to loop over with a batch size of 1. We're going to execute this step. All right, perfectly. We can see that the current item is now in the loop branch, which is exactly what we want. And now the next thing we want to do is we want to add a Slack node to this branch. So we can now replace this here. And let's add the Slack node. And in this situation, we are going to send a message. Perfect. So make sure that the correct credentials are inputted. And let's message a specific user or channel. In this case, I'm going to do a user. I'm just going to send it to myself for simplicity's sake. And now let's input the correct message text. Let's drag in our doc content here, which is our company research. And then below that, let's drag in our attendee doc content. Perfect. And then after that, we are good to go to execute this. And if we execute this here, all right, so the Slack message node executed successfully. So now let's go see what was outputted to my Slack. Perfect. Right here, you can see all of the information for this particular meeting. We can see that we have the title here, NVIDIA Sync, and a big company overview. And then we have an overview of all the attendees of the meeting. Perfect. So now we have just completed the meeting research agent here at Explorium Academy. Feel free to give this a try yourself, or hope you were building along with me. And I recommend that you guys take some time and really make this your own. And I look forward to seeing all of you in session 8.